Good afternoon and welcome to the broadcast of the Enid City Commission study session meeting. Broadcasting live in high definition from the lower level conference room at the City Administration Building located at 401 West Owen K. Garriott. Please stay tuned as Mayor Bill Shuey presides over the meeting.
No matter what game it is.
At the Commissioner's request, discuss any item of concern on the regular session agenda of January the 5th, 2016.
I need educated on something,
Sure.
which I know I need that a lot, but on the claims list, sorry, Ron.
You have the floor.
Step on toes there.
On the EMA,
Yes.
the schools, tell me what that is.
What the schools is, there was a bond issue that's passed in 2003 to support not only schools but streets. And it had to do with the BRAC round at that time and supporting Vance. And one of the projects was fixing Glenwood School and doing some improvements at Enid High. The first 8 years of that tax, it was split evenly. It's a 1/4 cent sales tax, so it went 1/8 to schools and 1/8 to the city. The last 7 years, and until it expires in 2018, I think February 2018 or January, something like that, go all to the schools. There's school bond debt associated with what they did, and the money above and beyond that school bond debt, because the sales tax has grown, is distributed between 7 school districts.
Is it the whole county then?
It's 7 specified school districts
Pretty
in the
close.
county, which Enid Public Schools is the lion's share. Chisholm, I think Drummond's on
Garber,
there.
Wacom, Chisholm,
I think
Drummond.
Garber, yeah. And so that's twice a year we make those payments out of, we look at it as the excess sales tax or above and beyond what was required to pay the school bond debt.
How many years is that set up for then?
We will continue to do that until, is it 2018, Aaron? January or February?
2023.
20 what?
2023.
On the school bond?
The first one, the second one's 2023.
Yeah, I think,
2003.
we'll go back and look at it, but I think
Sales
it's.
tax, I think, goes off in 18.
Yeah, I think it's
Doesn't all
50
the
years.
Oklahoma Tax Commission monies come to the city and then
Yes.
it's distributed out of?
The sales tax money comes to us in one lump sum amount. We break it down by all the sales tax groups or amounts that we have, including the 1/4 cent school sales tax.
Makes it easier on the OTC.
Okay.
So
That's
that's
not a county issue. We have 7 school districts inside the city of Enid. So all of those
It
districts.
touches it somehow, that way it works, that way.
Barely.
yeah, is it Pioneer out by your ward?
No.
Yeah.
It's a little piece of that, not a lot.
Well, probably more than Drummond, I would think.
Brookside.
Pioneer's Brookside.
Yeah, Brookeside's all done. Well,
And
one side
Valley
of
View?
30th.
There's specific percentages that are laid out in that bond issue, and then we
I see.
take the money times that percentage, and that's how we determine that. So twice a year, you'll see that until it expires.
Okay, appreciate it.
Anything else? Anyone else? Ron? Item 3, the Call Lake update. Michael, is that you or Chris?
Yeah, Chris and
Yes,
Michael
it is.
are going to do the update. What they're going to set you up here for is, there's some decisions that need to be made by the commission very soon that are going to impact the engineering and the ability to continue and complete the engineering phase 1 analysis. So we made an effort to try and give you what you need in as succinct a format as possible.
Okay, let's go with it.
Mike, be sure to speak into the microphone.
Yes, sir. Okay, these are the program segments, and as you can tell, we'll be talking briefly about program management, intake, terminal storage, and then the water treatment plant. Here's our timeline. This is pretty much unchanged with the exception of we have not completed that. It's in my box for review. These are the things I need you to be ready for. We're going to make a recommendation for your consideration and action in February for where to site the intake structure over at the lake. We're going to present to you a recommended location for where to put the water treatment plant here, and also some general locations for the terminal storage that includes the equalization storage and the emergency storage. And I think Michael will get through the details.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Just a brief overview of some of the key infrastructure items that Chris identified we're going to discuss tonight. We'll start with the intake. I've mentioned this before, but just to reiterate, because we are going to be coming to you with a recommendation in February on the intake. We have looked at one at-grade option. That's a pump station located on the ground outside of the lake. And then we've looked at 3 in-lake options where the intake structure itself is actually out in the body of water of Call Reservoir. We're looking and evaluating 5 different types of intake pump stations themselves. That's just a different way we remove the water from the lake once the structure is out there in the lake itself. And we'll have a definite path forward to present to you for recommendation in February. The at-grade alternative, the one at-grade, the pump station on the ground there, involves coordination with the Call Reservoir Authority, which basically is Ponca City and Stillwater. I've mentioned that to you guys before. What that concept looks like is right now there's an existing 48-inch gravity line that penetrates the dam, and there's an open pipe out in the lake, as you can see at the top of the screen there, and then it ties that 48-inch line to the existing Stillwater pump station. The concept for Enid would be to install a new pump station adjacent to the Stillwater pump station, a new T on that existing 48-inch raw water line. What that does present us, though, is some hydraulic capacity concerns. There's a lot of high velocity in that pipeline if Stillwater's using their full allocation and Enid's using its full allocation, and Ponca City wants to use their full allocation at some point. And so we've looked at another alternative here as well, which would be the installation of a new T up closer to the dam, and then a new 48-inch gravity line to your new pump station. That frees up a lot, but not all, of the hydraulic restrictions. That is the at-grade alternative. There are some issues, as I mentioned, with this alternative. It does not allow complete ownership or use of the infrastructure in that raw water line, as you would be a partner with KRA, as well as the hydraulic constraints that I mentioned earlier. With regards to the in-lake options, that takes care of the one at-grade option. With regards to the in-lake options, we've identified 3 potential locations here that I've highlighted here as 1, 2, and 3. Those are strategically located based on a lot of different engineering criteria, primarily water availability and water quality. 1 is at the dam, 2 is a little bit up in the river a little bit, and then 3 is on up a little bit higher. We've spent quite a bit of time looking at option 1. It was our preferred option from a water quality and water quantity standpoint. There are, however, significant permitting requirements associated with alternative 1 in the in-lake options. That would require us to attach your infrastructure to federal government infrastructure, Corps of Engineer infrastructure. Would be significant 408 permitting requirements, which we are still evaluating and identifying, but it's not quite as feasible with regards to meeting the schedule for your program as the other 2 options would be. So looking a little closer at option 2, this is just a little tighter aerial showing the location itself. The western part of the lake is bordered by Army Corps of Engineers property. You could envision a intake structure there located where number 2 is, and then some type of pump station located outside the lake on the bank. The routing of the pipeline from that location is yet to be determined. We could use in parallel some Corps property, or we could end up with private easement access as well. That approximate location is about 500 feet from the bank. This is the location of option 3, a little bit further north of the dam. Again, bordered by U.S. Army Corps property. A little bit easier from a pipeline standpoint to jump on some county road easements perhaps, but there may also be private property land acquisition requirements with this option as well. What we are doing right now in conjunction with your staff is developing a non-monetary evaluation criteria. Obviously, monetary cost will be an important decision factor in determining which way to go, and we're working on the cost estimates for these options now. But there's also some non-monetary criteria that we'd like to take a look at, and these include things like short-term impacts to the program, things like impacts during the construction phase, impacts to private property owners, long-term impacts, post-construction phase impacts, accessibility, things of that nature that will impact your staff and its ability to operate these facilities long-term. Risk potential, things like outages that may occur. What's the risk of losing our water supply? Is there a higher risk associated with option 2 as compared to option 3? All those items will be weighted against each other. Difficulty of property acquisition, difficulty of permitting, that's going to weigh pretty heavily against option 1 because it requires such stringent 408 permitting from the Corps of Engineers. And obviously water quality, being able to ensure that we can get adequate water quality from all 3 in-lake options. The intake path forward is to finalize the rankings that I just mentioned, the non-monetary evaluations. Finalize those rankings and site recommendations in early January. We have a meeting with your staff next Wednesday where that will be discussed in great detail, and then present a intake site recommendation to this commission for your consideration and action in February. Let's move on to the water treatment plant. Lots of criteria went into.
A question
Yes, sir.
first you go. I take it they don't tell you where we have to put the pipe in, or, I mean, you have your choice of doing that, or we do?
With regards to the intake?
Yeah.
They can't dictate where, but they can impact the schedule by requiring significant permitting requirements based on where we decide. So they can tell us where not to do it. They're not going to tell us where to do it.
That's interesting. I figured by buying up permits, they kind of had to have control over most of that.
Yes, Mayor.
How much water do you bypass by going to the second location or the third location? There's a lot of water south of that to get to the dam that you wouldn't have access to.
We don't think there's any, your full allocation is receivable from all 3 of those options. You would not be limited on the amount that you could withdraw, even though it's further north in the river channel. All that water eventually goes downhill anyway. You're just getting it before it gets downhill. Okay, I'll move on to the water treatment plant. Lots of engineering criteria and non-monetary evaluation done with regards to the water treatment plant site selection as well. You can see some of those factors on the slide. The recommended location that we have for the water treatment plant is on Chestnut. I believe you guys are probably pretty familiar with this site. If you could see the laser on the screen, this is the current location of water treatment plant number 2. This is a large concrete clear well structure where a lot of your water is stored now. This site has been master planned for another large clear well structure at some point in the future should you need that. Much of this infrastructure is salvageable and reusable moving forward and allows a convenient tie-in location for the new water treatment plant, not only for the distribution of treated call water, but also the blending of water that you're bringing in from the west. What we have here is just a rendering of what the water treatment plant might look like. This has the potential to change. The site would not change, of course, unless you directed us to change it. But this layout of the treatment facility has the potential to change based on what type of treatment alternative we ultimately end up selecting. What's reflected here is just a conventional water treatment plant.
Would there be an aroma with that?
No, sir.
We already own the land.
Let me qualify that answer a little bit. It wouldn't be any different than what you currently experience there with water treatment plant number 2.
How much land do we own there now?
Robert, you may have to help me with this. The acreage that you have here now.
I think it's
Maybe.
we own where the existing tank is, just to the west of the existing tank. I'm not sure that.
So we need to acquire that
Basically,
property.
the north half of that property.
Yes, there would be land acquisition involved.
And its current use is agricultural?
That's our understanding, yes. The Chestnut site, as I mentioned, is the recommended site. There's a lot of good reasons why, primarily due to sharing of existing infrastructure and assets that you already have located at water treatment plant number 2. Now we'll move on to the terminal storage discussion. You'll recall we have 2 types of storage. One is EQ storage, the equalization storage, and 2 is the emergency storage or the community water feature as we've been referring to it. EQ is much, much smaller than EM storage. The TSR site selection considerations involved feasibility considerations, the intended use of the EQ and the EM, as well as cost considerations associated with the EQ and EM. With regards to feasibility, these are just some of the highlights. There were much more detailed items than just reflected here, but in the interest of time, I'll just touch on a few. Feasibility considerations, we wanted to make sure we had adequate site footprint to house the EQ and the EM. Environmental considerations, you guys recall we went through some of that environmental evaluation when we looked at some other sites on the east side of town and some of the environmental issues that were discovered during that evaluation. With regards to the emergency storage, we wanted to make sure and maintain a 5-mile radius from Woodring Airport and Vance Air Force Base, as we've cooperated with both of those entities quite a bit over the last few months to try to find an optimal solution with regards to siting the terminal storage. Cost considerations, I presented at last month's meeting an example of the storage not being located adjacent to the raw water pipeline. If you'll recall, we showed pipeline going south down to a new site and then pumping back up to the pipeline. I believe you asked a couple of questions about the cost associated with that. So cost considerations, as long as we can keep it close to the raw water pipeline from call, it helps reduce cost. We also want to put it at a high elevation within the community. We're going to have to pump the water from call anyway, so we might as well pump it up to a higher elevation within the community so that once we have that water stored in town, we can gravity flow without pumping for other uses, but meaning to get it to the water treatment plant. We also took a look at some of the intended use considerations. This was a very simple analysis on our part. Just looked at, with regards to emergency storage, the community water feature, proximity to the population base. And we, in our opinion, something that's located really, really far outside of town is probably not going to get as much use as if it's located a little bit closer to town. Keeping in mind, we're still trying to maintain that 5-mile radius buffer for air travel. And then with regard to the EQ, we want to make sure that we have a site that allows us to maintain consistent water quality, as well as a site that we can secure to maintain that water quality. So this is where we're at with regards to siting the terminal storage. At this point, this is still in draft form and subject to your input. But we've identified 2 locations, and the reason why we've picked 2 locations is because, as you'll recall from a few meetings back, we have 2 pipeline corridors. We have a direct route, which is basically a straight line from Call to Enid, and then we have a northern route from Call that comes across the north and then cuts down into Enid, and we eliminated the southern route. The black box represents, it's located in the red portion of the slide, which represents higher elevations, and it's located a little bit further north of town to optimize the termination point for the northern pipeline alignment. The red rectangle is also located on higher elevation. It's not quite as high an elevation as the black box, but it's still suitable elevations, and it coincides better with a termination point for the direct pipeline, the end of the direct pipeline route. The 5-mile radius is represented in the hatched circle there below, indicating that both of these sites are beyond the 5-mile radius of Vance Air Force Base. The water treatment plant site is located with the green dot there toward the middle of the screen, representing again that we can gravity flow from both of the terminal storage reservoirs to the water treatment plant, which was an objective of the program. So the recommended path forward on the terminal storage is to continue our efforts in design, preliminary design, conceptual design with these 2 optimized locations, the northern corridor, which was the black box that I identified, and the direct corridor, which is the red box. With regards to the equalization storage, this is the non-community water feature. We're still evaluating where best that should be. It's a lot smaller footprint, has a lot less impact on Vance Air Force Base, and it's more of a water quality and site security issue, and so we're looking at potential locations, maybe even adjacent to the water treatment plant site, or it could also still be adjacent to the community water feature, just fenced off in a different manner.
Okay. So in summary, we've gone over these items, and these are the things we're going to expect we'll be bringing back to you in the next in this month and next month. Number 1, we do need to get settled on this site for the intake storage. We'll have that back to you in February. The water treatment plant, we're pretty confident that we like where this storage is at, and we'll bring that back to you in January. Now, we've shown it precisely by the existing water treatment plant. We do have a little bit of flexibility north of there and maybe just a little bit east or west. So we're not deadlocked in, but that's just, if we optimize it to our engineering requirements and our engineering criteria, that's where we would put it. And then, of course, terminal storage. We're going to present, we've shown you where the general location of where we'd like to go with these, where we optimize for our different routes, and we'll bring that back to you in January. So basically, we identify and nail down as best we can where's the beginning of the pipeline and where's the end of the pipeline, where the water treatment plant's going to be, and we press on. Yes, sir.
On the terminal storage, on the emergency part of it, or the community water feed portion of that, in round numbers, what is that cost?
We don't really have a good cost estimate on that. We do know we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 acres of surface.
Because when we were talking about lakes,
At about 12
that
feet.
translated to $50 to $80 million, if I remember right. We were talking about building a lake.
Different scale, though.
But regardless, if that, let me ask the question in a different way to what I'm getting at. Since we have this community will always have the groundwater from our wells.
Absolutely.
Do we really need an emergency storage portion of this? Could that be eliminated and then just use the equalization portion? And then if that pipeline got cut from Caw for 2 years, we would be able to manage with however long it would take to repair it.
We've sized that for 2 weeks worth of outage.
So could we manage for 2 weeks on the wells is what I'm asking.
If you went to
however many millions it is by not doing that?
not all of it, because you'd have to expend your equalization just a little bit, because we are using that as part of the buffer. Then we would have to optimize equalization based on how much water we want to pump and what size of pipeline we're putting in. So there's all these different pieces that fit together. So it's not a clear strike it off the balance sheet or the check or the bill.
So if the emergency reservoir gets smaller or goes away, you're saying the pipeline would be bigger?
Well, either that or you got to pump more. You got to have more pressure and pump higher volumes.
Because we're planning on, is it 18 or 19 million is the planning?
18 and a half roughly.
And then we're still planning on about 6 million or so from the well fields, right?
Yes.
Although it may be optimistic to say that we'll always have the well fields. I mean, that's the one thing we don't know about the well field is what it's going to be doing in 30 years. I mean, I hope that we will have the well field. The other option, if we design a system that would allow us to rely solely on Caw, is the ability to redirect the well field for either sell it to another community or lease the rights or something to that effect. That may be a really lucrative revenue stream for the city in 30 years or 25 years.
So, all right, so one time, I'd hate to see us.
We kicked ourselves for.
I'd hate to see us sell our wealth.
But actually, if you tried to live off the well field for 2 weeks, you probably could today. But I can't.
Time of the year.
But I can't tell you. Well, I mean, there'd be rationing or conservation required. It's just hard to say how far in the future, and how hard will it be? How painful will it be? I mean, that's why we've balanced it the way we have.
I think I mentioned this last time you were here. I think you go in and size that pipeline, always thinking that you will not have that well field at one time. I hope we always have it, but I don't think you can always say we're always going to have that well field. I'd rather prepare extra than not enough.
And that gets to be a pretty detailed discussion. It really does, because there's a lot of pieces that move together to make this work. And could you do without it for a while? Yes.
If we decide what we want, will we have dollars and cents to go with it, as David alluded to? That's at the same time, you come back with that later.
Is that your statement?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, we owe you some cost estimates in the spring of this year. We're trying to nail down, we've got 3 intake alternatives, we've got 2 pipeline routes, we've got a couple different storage sites. We're trying to nail down what's best with regards to those pieces of the infrastructure before we pull together a full cost estimate for you. But cost is certainly being considered in helping us pick those sites.
I like the number of options that you've come up with.
And keep in mind, when it comes down to when we finally get those numbers, and they're not going to be perfect numbers by any stretch because we are predicting the future, then is when we're going to have to make some really difficult decisions.
How far away are we from that point?
You should get pretty good rough order of magnitude numbers in March, April, May this year.
At what point are we gonna have to start spending real money? I mean.
You mean
not
as
that
opposed to-
Engineers aren't expensive and worth every penny. But at what point do we need to?
Actually, I don't think I've run that past my boss just yet. I've got to do a little more analysis on it and make sure my timeline works and
I mean, I've
figure.
seen, you have the timeline that you've been showing us, but it's.
Yes, I do.
We've talked about next fiscal year, I think, for the bulk of it, unless something's changed.
Yeah, what I've told you in the past, or recently, was that we're looking, and understand these are very gross numbers, somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 30 million in the next budget year.
And those are for things like storage costs at the lake.
Storage
property
contract.
Acquisition, engineering fees.
Yes,
It'll be a really fun budget year.
It'll be challenging
We're
as
just gonna
usual.
budget.
you know,
I would
and
expect nothing less.
Yeah.
you know, and the other thing that we've got to do with part of that is, is we've got, by then we'll have probably come down to what route do we want to really pursue. So now we've got to go start on the geotechnical and the surveying of that route and all the fun that comes with that.
As well as geotechnical in the lake.
What additional information does the commission think that you guys you need or want to have to be able to make these decisions like we're talking about in January, February? Is there additional information or that we can be preparing and bring to you so that you have it in advance of asking you to make a decision? These decisions are going to impact the engineering, which ultimately will impact how much it costs.
I mean, is the decision we're talking about first going to be intake site selection? Is
That's
that
No,
the first?
February.
actually, the first decision we're gonna bring in front of you is, are you okay with where we want to put the water treatment plant? And then are you okay with the general areas where we want to put our terminal storage unit, reservoir? And then in February, we'll say, we'll have finished our analysis on the intake, and we'll come forward with that.
Okay. And so the question, what else do we feel like we need to know in order to make that decision? That's a really tough question. I mean, I think it's as much as anything, I mean, we've been, I think, justifiably relying on you guys to know what you're doing. What I would like to know more than anything is how confident you are with the determinations you've made in terms of, the viability of the water treatment site, the viability of the terminal storage location generally. I mean, is this, you are 100% sure that what you presented is viable? Or is it pretty sure, but something crazy may come up? I mean, what's your confidence level?
If I may, Gerald?
Yeah, go ahead.
As far as these bottom two are concerned,
Yeah.
the one thing that we still have to go back and circle around is the environmental phase 1, phase 2. Make sure there's nothing hiding there that our desktop didn't see.
So I think that's what kind of stopped us short when we were talking
Yes.
about the property, or, I mean, some of that.
But we don't anticipate those kind of problems at either one of these locations. And you'll recall from these squares, those were really big. They weren't a 40-acre plot.
Mm-hmm.
They covered a lot of property.
Sure.
Is it basically a process of elimination? To me, like we eliminate something that we can't do environmentally or what?
It is. It's a process.
Common sense.
It's correct. And then in the future, make sure that when we see what those dollars are going to be, can we make that payment? And then it's a question of what do we do now?
It's gonna be a lot of dollars anywhere we go, Chris.
It will, absolutely. It's not a trivial matter.
Well, if you guys, if you have further guidance or information, I'd like to make sure we're giving you what you need to make some of these decisions. And maybe, I mean, if there's more information we need to get it. To stay on timeline, that's why we're saying these decisions, you want them in this time frame, right?
Absolutely. This is key to keeping us on schedule.
We're actually paying Garver a lot of money to make a recommendation that we can rely on. And if we can't rely on that recommendation, then we need to hire somebody else.
Yeah.
I'm not an engineer, and I don't,
That's
my
absolutely right.
expertise in making this decision is going to be negligible.
You're
Okay.
really good at decisions, though, Ron.
And if I may, my staff and I, we have gone through all of this with them, with Garver, because they bring it to us, and we spend a lot of time going through this stuff.
My challenge to the commission is not as much whether or not these guys are gonna be right with their decisions, but we have to make sure that our constituency is on board with this. And if they're not, then we're wasting a bunch of time and money. So I would encourage everybody around the table to talk to their constituents and ask for input and make sure that this is gonna go to the polls. It almost has to. I think we've talked about that enough, but I'm not so sure that we know that it's the right thing sitting around the table, but I don't know that it's really been properly vetted through the community as something that is a priority.
I mean, I think it is, as much as, you know, three people in a room will have four opinions on something. This is one of the few things, in talking to folks over the last 6 months, that I don't hear a lot of varied opinion. I mean, how long, 6 months, how long have we been talking about this?
5 years that I've been here.
Yeah, I mean, since I've been on here, I mean, this does feel like one of the, I feel like we are more clearly on the right path and more confident about this decision than almost any others we've made, in part because it's so clearly and evidently the right path for this incredibly vital resource. I've talked to lots of folks, and I don't know that there's a lot of question.
I don't disagree with that, but I think once we get down to more specifics, when people are gonna have opinions,
Mhm.
and then we say, well, it could cost 250 or it could cost 300 million.
Big
then
difference.
People are gonna have an opinion.
They are, but we need to be clear that we.
I think we just need to be very clear with what our expectations are and talking to people as openly as we can.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
And
When
there
you
is
get
going to be opposition.
When you get
There
to
is
the dollar
gonna be.
sign.
And you know, keep in mind also that the people that you're probably mostly talking to are more educated. And not all of the voters, unfortunately, are gonna be educated on the issue. So we're gonna rise against the challenge of asking the city, or asking the constituents to vote in favor of something that the city feels is important. And we all know what challenge that creates.
And we are certainly,
What's that?
Several.
and we're ready to support that effort with whatever it takes, whatever the timing is deemed appropriate, with either whatever, town hall meetings, going to civic clubs, reaching out, having meetings here at town or at City Hall. We do have the stuff on the website. We're making an effort. We've talked to a few interested groups. Mostly those groups were people with stakeholders in the well fields. But we're certainly, we expect that and are ready to support that effort.
Need to hold those meetings in July and August.
There's a lot of need to go out and get some public input. I agree.
And I go back to the strategic part of it. We've got our sanitary sewer facility built and running. It will take us for decades. Downtown's basically done on our part. You get the water here, and you get the water here for 50 years.
All right, Mayor, if there's any other questions, we're probably ready for the sidewalks.
Thank you, Mike.
Table the sidewalk.
We have you guys have seen this presentation, I think, recently, because I think it went out to you today. And we're going to talk about sidewalks. Obviously, we've been talking about it for a while. I think we've got a lot of good information, soliciting ideas and feedback from you. So hopefully, we're going to present that now. And I think Andrea's going to start by talking about how we got to where we're at with the ordinance and what's changed and when it was required. and then we'll go in and hear some other things about standards and other communities and such, and funding.
In 1994, we didn't have any requirement at all in the city to build sidewalks. There was no encouragement. I don't know if the commission just didn't feel that there was a need. There were sidewalks in our community, and some sidewalks were being built, but there was no requirement. The first requirement was in 2003, when the commission created, or I'm sorry, it was the Enid Municipal Code of 2003, but the amendments came in 2009, where the city created the Sidewalk Partnership Program, and then required commercial developments to include sidewalks that paralleled city streets, and required industrial developments to include sidewalks, or to include sidewalks that paralleled city streets, but only if the development included sidewalks within the development. And the Sidewalk Partnership Program was only available in residential areas, and was only to be used to rebuild sidewalks where sidewalks already existed. In October 2011, the Sidewalk Partnership Program was expanded to include commercial areas. It could still only be used to rebuild sidewalks where sidewalks already existed. And then a change was made to the requirement, and the commission required that all new construction required sidewalks that paralleled certain streets. Owen K. Garrett, arterial highways, arterial streets, collector streets. I think Van Buren was also included on there. And continue to require that all commercial developments include sidewalks. In November of 2014, the commission expanded the requirement to include sidewalks on all developments and all redevelopments. In May 2015, the commission created a few exceptions, including the exception for unimproved roads, the placement of accessory buildings of 659 square feet or smaller, and the addition of additions to existing buildings of 649 square feet or smaller. So what we have in place now is that all developments and redevelopments must include sidewalks that parallel all abutting streets, with those three exceptions. And then multifamily residential, commercial, educational, industrial, and public gathering developments must incorporate sidewalks within their developments if there are more than one building. All of the sidewalks must comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and there are minimum specifications in our code, which also, the code also refers to engineering standards. And then whenever there's a conflict between the ADA and the code, then whatever the more restrictive is applies. And that's where we are today. I think. Who's next, Chris?
Thank you, Gerald. The commission's probably very familiar with most of this. The variance procedure begins with MAPC, and then it comes to you, and you're ultimately the body that can approve or deny. There is no application fee for the variance at this point. We have to date processed 19 applications, and you can see where they are. I'll draw your attention to the bottom. We have pending 5 residentials that'll be coming to you in the near future. The one thing that I did is I took time to map the green is approved, red partial, where that was on 26th and Walnut, where you granted a variance to the 26th part, but you required it on Walnut. 2 withdrew, 1 denied, and then you can see white represents the ones that are pending. Are there any questions?
One question, if I may. If they, you indicate there's no application fee.
Yes, sir.
Are there any other expenses involved in obtaining a variance?
No, sir.
One of the gentlemen that contacted me indicated that they had to get approval from a certain number of neighbors or something?
No. That would be more like a Board of Adjustment variance or a rezoning.
Process, there's nothing like that?
No, they just simply fill out their application, give their reasons for why they want the variance. We take it to MAPC, and then we bring it to you, the commission. There's no fee. Any other questions?
I think, well, I'll go back. I think what I mentioned the other day, on this here, we might show a lot of different variances that came in front of us, but how many was actually the process of doing?
We have that slide for
Coming
you.
up, okay.
Approximately there's 103 that have been done, but We can go straight to that if you'd like, or Chris
No, you're-
Gdansky was going to talk about the sidewalk requirements now as far as standards. Oh, Robert will.
I'll just cover, thank you, Gerald and Commissioners. Just cover the standards for sidewalk construction. Basic standards are 4-inch thickness on the concrete, 5-inch PC concrete sidewalks is standard. Typical tie for PC concrete, we usually use about 50 years, and that's anticipated engineering life. Now, of course, in sidewalks, if you have trees or shrubs or other soil conditions, can't affect that, but if we can stay away from the roots problem, they can last for a good time. Cost estimates, $55 linear feet, using for estimates for sidewalks on a typical 50-foot lot, and be about $2,750 to give you a comparable cost. Also, curbs, just for reference, curb and gutters are about $60 a foot when we bid those out. Want to point out that that's for sidewalks. Usually, of course, at the intersection, we always have to build ramps and truncated domes, and those range from about $5,000 to $7,000 a ramp, depending on the location and the requirements to fit. Some ordinance requirements on plans and specifications. This information on utilities, which conflict with sidewalks sometimes. Sanitary sewers typically have been developed and go in the back of lots, as well as with other utilities. Water lines are typically put in the front of the lots. We are looking to move to put sanitary sewers in the front. We're looking to make changes there. We've done some subdivisions that way, and the reason is it's very difficult to maintain that sanitary sewer in the back of the lot because of the fencing and the other shrubberies that have encroached on our need to maintain those systems. Barrier curbs are required. The specified buried utilities are placed in the back of lots, and we'll cover their location in a minute. We have a slide covering that. There are some issues out there to look at going to developing rollover curbs and subdivisions. They're not really allowed right now, but we've done some for trial basis. The common problem with rollover curbs is a 6-inch curb is designed to carry the drainage. Rollover curbs are typically shorter, and we have a problem with carrying the drainage in those curbs. They can overflow onto the grass area. So there's some issues to resolve there, as well as there's some plans proposals to put utilities in the front of subdivisions, and when that occurs, we have to work how they deconflict those with the sidewalks that are now required. Utility easements on the subdivision develops. Required 10-foot on both sides of the property line, typically a 20-foot utility easement. And if they only own on one side, then the ordinance requires 20-foot provided on the side that's platted. This is our current layout for utilities placement inside easements, typically at the back of the lot. If we do move to putting utilities in the front, besides water and sewer, we are looking to reevaluate this data. This data just identifies sewer, gas, electrical, telephone, and cable system, and where they're offset from the center of the easement, the 20-foot easement. We do plan to move sewers in the future into the fronting right away and out of the back, so we'll open up a little room for additional utilities in the back. Again, type of curb, 6-inch barriers required for both local and collectors. On arterial streets, we actually...
What's this got to do with sidewalks? The curb part.
What it has to do with sidewalks is typically there is some interest in placing sidewalks next to rollover curbs, and we just want to discuss that. That's a adaptive problem that creates. You can do it against a 6-inch curb. If you do it against a rollover curb, then you tend to have traffic up on the sidewalk. But it's just some additional information. I think that we thought there was some questions on.
If somebody is building, if they've got a corner lot, are they required to build the handicapped accessible ramp to the street on both sides of that corner?
Yes, where sidewalks are provided, curb ramp detection warnings must be provided at each intersection. So that's correct.
So that would be their obligation as well as constructing the
Yes.
sidewalk.
By city code, that's correct. That covers the specification standard for sidewalks. Any questions I can address? Thank you.
Angela?
This slide here represents our current ordinance that we have in place from the 2015 Property Maintenance Code, which requires owners to maintain their sidewalks. We do have older sidewalks out there that we could apply this ordinance to. We have used it sparingly in the past, but it may be something if we're pursuing sidewalks that we need to enforce more often. Andrea also found that it's in the Oklahoma statutes.
This addresses your question, Commissioner Tim.
We went back through all of our permits that we've issued since December 2014 and found that we had 103 sidewalks that were required. And this is not including the variances. So there was a total of 117, 118. 85 were with new residential. So that's in our subdivisions like Chisholm Creek, Pheasant Run, Terra Estates, Wilderness Cove. So the majority were there. And that's the breakdown on those variance applications. Then we did 4 mobile homes and 12 new businesses. We did find that we have 1 new business and 1 mobile home that did not do their sidewalk. So we'll have to address that through code enforcement. That's additional breakdown. Here's some examples of ones that have been built.
I visited that location there.
This one?
Those are the only 2 sidewalks in that location.
Yes, this one.
They didn't bring it clear to the corner, did they?
This one was in a cul-de-sac where the back part of it was constructed, and then this is in the front. This is the one I'm thinking of. This is one of our subdivisions that will have them throughout because they started permitting at the same time that ordinance went into place.
Wouldn't that be a big part of the 85?
Yes. Well, it is, hang on, I can give you the number on that. Right now, they're 32. Did anybody have any questions about any of those before we? Yes, Mayor. I'm sorry?
Go ahead and speak to that a little more.
This one? Okay. We wound up doing some research to find out what other cities were doing. So we researched through their ordinances, and then we also called and spoke with their staff members. These were the cities that we contacted. And what we found is there's a lot of similarities. I mean, everybody wants sidewalks in their communities, so everybody is doing a lot of things very similarly to how we do ours, which is with single family, multifamily. There's a few exceptions for industrial zone properties. If you're in an area where there's no sidewalks, say way out on 54th, maybe it shouldn't apply out there versus industrial property that's more within a walking area within the city. Property zone residential estates or agricultural, that's where our unimproved road might apply in this circumstance. Additions to any of the above can trigger a need for a sidewalk, just like what we have if you go over 650. What I found is there's just varying degrees on that. It might be a certain percentage of the size of the building or a certain square footage like we have it. Non-residential remodels, some cities in designated areas, if you were going in and remodeling the building, they may want you to do a sidewalk at that time. It doesn't just apply to a new construction on a building. And then several communities had a fee in lieu of construction, which it doesn't mean that somebody can say, I don't want to do a sidewalk, so here's some money. How they're applying it is they have a fee if you're in an area where they don't have other sidewalks already under construction, or if you have a topography issue, like say where we have like out on West Garriott where we have some of those drainage ditches and people have said, well, it'll be hard for me to construct one there. They have a fee in lieu of construction, so they can take that money in at that time, and then later on when they go back into that area to do sidewalks, additional sidewalks, they can apply that money at the time. But there's a lot of different ways that I noticed that people were doing that fee in lieu of, so we could, if we're interested in that, we could do, you know, any combination of things. This is the one major difference that I did find. We are requiring a sidewalk when you do an accessory building in a residential area. And I did not find any of the other communities that were applying it under that circumstance. Also, if a new home is constructed in an area, staff looks to see if that original plat had a sidewalk. If it did, the sidewalk might be required, or if they're in an area that's been designated by a comprehensive plan or, say, a road improvement or a capital improvement project. Did anybody have any questions over any of that information?
Go back one slide, please.
To this one?
One more. No,
Other way.
the third item down, where the city of Enid requires a sidewalk when a new home is constructed or placed. That probably is if something happens to the home, fire, flood, earthquake, tornado. They
Right.
build it. They have to build a sidewalk in front of it.
Right. And we have several,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
we have a lot of infill lots in our community. You know, we've seen a few of the mobile homes come through where for whatever reason that home is no longer there, they bring in another one. But we also have areas in our community where a house is burned or it's been demolished or maybe it just never even developed in that area.
And then the next line, other cities, is that the 6 cities?
Yes,
And they do not require a sidewalk?
right.
Sidewalks were not required by the plat?
Unless they have designated it as an area where they know they're going to go in and do some work, road improvements, a capital improvement, or by the comprehensive plan. Okay.
Well, Commissioners, just a couple more slides, and then the intent is to get your feedback about whatever changes, if any, you want to see in the ordinance. Specifically, we're having this discussion tonight because Mayor and Commissioner Tim had requested that we talk about the funding or the sidewalk programs. Here's some funding ideas that staff we kicked around. We already know we do a sidewalk partnership program. This year, that program wasn't funded due to financial constraints, but that's still a program that's out there. We talked about the possibilities of utility bills. We can do that if that's something that you would choose to do. We talked about a small fee. It would generate probably the most amount of money But we're also, one thing we'd probably want to figure out is what else are we going to have to charge, if any, for Call Lake, for instance. And so that would be a sensitivity, but that is a possibility. We talked building permits. I think that's some things that maybe some of you guys had mentioned and staff talked about. We can do that. We could require everybody to, on a building permit, to pay a certain fee that would go into a fund that could be used either to fund this program or whatever program that you wanted to fund sidewalks. Obviously, this is what we've done before, just directly budgeting, but this year there weren't funds to do that. We talked about this idea. Commissioner Brownlee, I think that was something that you and had talked about. And this is an arbitrary number. This is just a thought looking at it. The construction right now from that slide, you recall, was about $55 a linear foot. So the thinking was that the fee in lieu of would be something like a third of that you would pay into a fund that would help fund other sidewalks. And as you'll see later, it couldn't be used to fund whoever's paying that to redo or do a sidewalk if they decide they want to do one later. There would be some common sense restrictions on that. And then we talked about, obviously, whatever method that might be adopted, the monies would be segregated, obviously, because we want them segregated and spent for sidewalks, just like our sewer monies and stormwater monies. There's also possibilities with the street sidewalk assessment district and a business improvement district. There's some differences there, and Andrew will have to help me with it, but the sidewalk assessment district pretty much requires everybody that's in that to participate and want to participate. And as you know, it's difficult to get everybody on board with any of that. The BID has lesser requirements. Is it 50%? I think I was reading some stuff about 50% if the city wanted to go and do that, say downtown or someplace. And so that's a possibility if we wanted to look into some of those things in certain areas of town. And those are the funding ideas that we had. And then this final slide is just on options or ideas based on the information that we've gotten from you and that we gathered in this research. And Mayor, you may want to talk about your proposal, but you had talked about just repealing what we currently have and either starting over or just not have that requirement. Here are some ideas that many of you have given us about amending the current ordinance, and they're supported by what other communities are doing. One of them is, obviously, I think pretty much everybody's in agreement, we want all new construction to build sidewalks. This is an idea that we talked about. Currently, we don't give an exemption for agriculturally zoned property. That might be something to consider. You heard Angela talking about the accessory buildings. I don't think there was a single other community out of the 6 that you looked at that required sidewalks triggered by an accessory building. So you might consider that. Obviously, the Sidewalk Partnership Program, right now, currently, it just fixes sidewalks where sidewalks exist. But maybe you want to expand that to open it up to where sidewalks don't exist. So if people want to throw in some of their own capital with some city money, then we start getting sidewalks. And finally, on further development of the fee in lieu of, here's some of the restrictions I talked about. Obviously, it would be for redevelopment only. New development must include sidewalks. So that's pretty straightforward. Whoever might pay a fee in lieu of certainly couldn't use the program later for that same property because they decided they want a sidewalk. And then finally, the fee in lieu of would not be available if adjacent properties have sidewalks or if other properties within the same residential subdivision have sidewalks. And I think Commissioner Tim, you talked about that idea. So anyway, those are the ideas that we wanted to bring to you as staff to talk about if you're inclined to want to change anything. I know, depending on your feedback, the next commission meeting, we're going to have at least 1 or 2 proposals based on what you tell us. So, any thoughts?
I like all the amendment ideas that staff has come up with. I think that would, we've tried something, and I think that would give the program some additional flexibility. I really like Aaron's idea about the fee in lieu of, but we talked about, I don't know how many meetings ago, 1 meeting ago, 3 weeks seems like a long time. And those seem like perfectly logical exemptions. I was interested, in one of these various sidewalk meetings we've had, we talked about how there aren't sidewalks in large areas, and so I was driving around the older parts of town, and there are huge swaths of town with lots and lots and lots of sidewalk. And some of them where you're missing, an empty lot doesn't have the sidewalk, or there are pieces where if we encourage continued growth, we can reconnect. But it was going back, just while we were sitting here, I kind of trying to remember some of those neighborhoods I was driving through. I was looking at this and pulled up their construction dates on the assessor's website, and all of them were built in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And so I don't know what was going on in the 20s or 30s or 40s where they were doing it right, where they were building sidewalk everywhere. And I don't know, was it part of the plat,
The WPA.
Andrea?
WPA.
I mean, was it all WPA?
A lot
think
of,
that-
I don't know,
Yeah.
I know my
Or
neighborhood,
CCC.
When they built the street, they put a sidewalk in.
Yeah.
The city did it.
Yeah.
a lot of them are WPA, they have.
And even though they're, 50, 60 years old, they're still usable. They're not perfect, and they're not ADA accessible, obviously, because the standards were different. But people use them. I mean, it is a resource that gets utilized by folks who can't, or for one reason or other, don't have the option to drive. I mean, I'd like to see this continued, but I like these suggestions that staff has come up with.
One thing I wanted to emphasize too that I didn't at the end was exactly what you brought up. It was very good to research on sidewalks, because many times when we look at the variances, we think, well, hey, all these people are coming with variances, but you saw many, many examples of where businesses and residents did do sidewalks, and 103 of them either have or will, because they have it as a requirement on their building permit, and there's been 14. So roughly that's about a 15% variance. Yes, sir. I'm going to go ahead and sit down while we discuss.
6:15, I have some thoughts.
Mayor, if you'd like us to pull up your thoughts, we can do that. It's on the
Sure.
record.
These are my thoughts, and they probably pertain to sidewalks in residential areas more than commercial areas. To me, I think our current sidewalk ordinance is not working. Our city council votes on the current ordinance to see if, we voted on a current ordinance to see if it would work. Thinking at the time was to consider or reconsider the ordinance if it was not workable. Our current ordinance, I don't think, is workable. Currently, the MAPC usually votes to approve a sidewalk ordinance. Item number 3, no one person on this city council would probably want a sidewalk next door or across the street from them if that existing house had to be rebuilt due to a fire, a tornado, an earthquake, with a sidewalk to nowhere as the current ordinance requires. A variance would probably be recommended. Item 4, no one on this city council lives in a housing addition that has sidewalks. Item 5, basically, sidewalks are along Maple, Independence, Broadway, and Main Street in our older neighborhoods and near the downtown area. And I might add, they're not maintained very well. If the developers or the landowners, people that owns the dirt, had wanted to include sidewalks in their additions 60 to 70 years ago, they would have done so. A few of the existing neighborhood additions in Enid that do not have sidewalks, or a few: Southern Heights, Brookside, East Hill, Valley View, Chisholm Creek, Heritage Hills, Hunter Hill, Willow Lake, The Meadows, El Paseo, Willow West, The Woodlands, La Mesa do not have sidewalks. 7 newer housing additions that have sidewalks are Pheasant Run, Terra Estates, and Stonebridge. I like those additions. They have sidewalks. Item 8, I would encourage each one of you to drive around some of our housing additions in Enid and see how few of the additions have sidewalks. Enid has approximately 75 square miles within its city limits. Drive around. Burn a little gas. It's cheap right now. Maybe we don't need a sidewalk ordinance. Maybe we're over-regulating. I do not think that we need to require sidewalks in our housing additions.
Enid has survived for the past 102 years without many sidewalks in its housing additions. Our current sidewalk ordinance was established in 2009 to encourage the city of Enid's 50-50 sidewalk program. A new plan to retain the 50-50 program can be development away from the ordinance. I don't think Enid should be known as the city with sidewalks to nowhere. All that being said, I think that we should place an item on the January 21st City Council agenda to abolish the current sidewalk ordinance, or, as we've shown tonight, redo it. We said we would relook at it if it weren't working. I don't think it's working. My thoughts.
Mayor, I think that abolishing the current sidewalk ordinance is certainly would not be the right approach. I think we need to take the one that we have and make some amendments to it. I like some of the ideas that were up there, and, you know, we kind of crossed the bridge about this commission feels like sidewalks are important. We just are down to figuring out the details to make it really a practical, workable situation. And the things that we've seen and we've run into in reading the background material that Angela did a lot of work putting this stuff together, and Andrea, I appreciate you providing it to us. A couple of other ideas that come out of that. Rather than just saying we're not going to request sidewalks in all of the areas where redevelopment in the old neighborhoods, I saw in one of the cities, they said if there's sidewalks on both sides of a property already, obviously you want to require it in that old neighborhood to make them connect. So I'd like to see us add that. Another good idea I saw in some of the other cities was almost everyone has an exemption for agricultural land, and that makes sense. They also had it's just a standard exemption in neighborhoods would have just a certain size lot. For instance, if the lots are 5 acres or so bigger so that the frontage is huge, it probably doesn't make sense, and we could probably build that into the ordinance. And then the third idea that was in there that is now completely escaped my mind, but the things that we have done, I mean, I have driven around some, and the places that people put the sidewalks in, I mean, I'm pretty proud of that. It looks great. Just in 1 year, we've accomplished 85. I know there's been a little grumbling in the commercial side to have to put those in. If you go look at the new car wash, for instance, it just stops in the flower bed of DiMaggio's pizza place there. So some of them do look kind of silly, but over time, they're going to fill in. And I think that really we ought to keep the ordinance. I think we ought to modify it, make a few tweaks to it, including taking out some of the residential stuff, because all the variances have been just, you know, old neighborhoods that have nothing there. And I think if we could compromise somewhere between completely abolishing it and adding some of the amendments, that we could come up with a really good ordinance.
You know, Dave, an example of that, two of the commercial properties that built sidewalks did connect. I mean, the ice place on Garriott and Dollar General, either one of them, absent the neighbor, would have been a sidewalk not connected.
Well, that was a big argument when the ice place went in, because
And it
everybody
was.
said, it's not
And
gonna
then-
go anywhere. Well,
and
now
then
it
their
goes
neighbor
somewhere.
comes in and builds something, and now we have more sidewalk. And Mayor, I've got to say, I disagree with a lot of what you said about the presence of sidewalks. I mean, and just sitting here scrolling through Google Maps, I mean, east of downtown, you have sidewalks on Cypress, on Elm, on Maple, on Randolph, on Broadway, on Main, on Oklahoma, on Cherokee, on Park, all the way to Garriott. Now, it's not every block, but in excess of a third through most of that, and in excess of a half through large swaths of it, all the way from 5th Street to about 20th. There are some areas where it's not, but you have huge swaths of town that have sidewalks, and they're not perfect. I won't say they're perfect.
And they were all built by government money from the WPA and the CCC bin.
Well, a lot of it may have been.
Drive the streets. If something happens to the house across the street from where you live, they're gonna be able to ask them to put a sidewalk right there.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of streets that have a sidewalk in one side or the other, not both sides. I have driven this town for 37 years. I used to make car loans and mortgage loans. I know where a lot of people live.
I've lived in this town for 38 years, and I grew up with sidewalks, and I used to walk them every day. I've been equally conservative with you on this issue, Mayor, and But, and I don't want sidewalks to nowhere, but abolishing the ordinance is a bad idea.
Abolishing is probably a bad term.
Well, that's what you said, so.
I agree, it's a bad term. Give me a better term. Give me a better term.
Modify? Yeah, I'd rather keep the existing ordinance as it is written than do away with it.
And
So, I mean, in my opinion, I like having sidewalks. I think there's a lot of advantage to having them. Ben, I mean, you're right on. They're all over the place. I'd rather have a plan where we can connect prioritized areas and a funding mechanism to make it happen. And it doesn't happen overnight, but
it hasn't happened in 103 years. We don't have that many sidewalks.
we
We have
haven't.
very few sidewalks.
Well, nobody had toilets for a long time either, but they got,
Hey,
I
we're
mean,
not talking
eventually,
about
everybody
toilets.
got one.
We're not talking about
Well, I'm
toilets.
just saying.
We're talking about a sidewalk. And fill in, if they built a new house in your addition today, the sidewalk goes in front of it. And I don't think you would ever build one in front of yours. That's only my opinion. It's only my opinion that we have a lot of that we don't have a lot of sidewalks. I have driven around. In your addition, if the house across the street burns or next to you on each side, they would build it back, they're gonna build a sidewalk to nowhere. That addition's been there 70 years. And if the lot owner, the dirt owner, had wanted, or the developer, had wanted a sidewalk, they would have built it. And the sidewalk is only the beginning of the expense of the land, of the dirt owner. You're gonna have a lot of additional costs except sidewalk because of the slope of the.
Okay, so.
I got a question.
Go ahead, Rodney.
On the 50/50, where's this, you know my words on it, what am I supposed to use if you want a variance? You wanna pay the
Fee
20,
in
if
lieu
you wanna
of?
pay the $20?
20,
Fee in lieu of?
Okay, when would that kick in if we would go to these newer,
30 days from the time the ordinance is
no,
changed.
if you don't, if you put all new businesses, when would you have, we're eliminating the variances, so when would that, we put the $20 down?
We wouldn't fully eliminate the variances, and Andrea could speak
That's
to
what I wanna
that.
know, when would they kick in?
But you would have a tool that there's options that you could deny the
Right.
variance. You want to speak to that?
Right.
I feel
Well,
better about it.
we would have certain restrictions probably, or we would recommend to you certain restrictions be placed on the fee in lieu of. And so staff would have guidelines to say, you have to do a sidewalk, for example, a brand new development.
Right.
Or it could be a new, commercial, building. Because most of the commercial buildings are not in developments as we think of developments. They're usually just on a piece of property on O&K Garrett or something like that. And so they should probably continue to put in sidewalks regardless of where they are. But for example, a residential development, if it's a brand new residential development, you don't have a choice. You put in a sidewalk throughout your development. But if you're putting in a residence in an older neighborhood, not old, because a lot of, like Ben said, a lot of the old neighborhoods have sidewalks, but in a development that doesn't have sidewalks, you may have the option then at that point to either pay the fee in lieu of, which can then be funded or can go into the city's 50/50 fund to put sidewalks elsewhere.
For people that do want.
Yeah, but
Right.
why would they, just a second, why would they have to put that down? Is it because they went over 650 square feet add-on or a new building? What kicks that in? Do they have,
Oh, a new building.
which we thought if we kick that out
Take
though.
that out, it doesn't count.
That's what I'm saying, are we lowering our ways of people paying the $20?
I think the proposal was to take out the accessory building, but
Right,
if,
the
if I'm
accessory
building a
building.
brand new house on an empty lot, if I'm doing
Yes.
infill
If you have a new
development.
construction, you can't.
Sure, but the
Take a
new, I think the
variance.
new construction in terms of a new development triggers
Yeah,
it, but
yeah.
infill development is, I think, what this is really targeting. So
The-
there are properties that, property developments that have been done not as one total development project, but infill. For instance, the Carlin Group development that was done 4 years ago now, where they took 32 separate, totally separate empty parcels and built new houses. So that's not a new development, it's not a whole new development, but it's new construction that would still trigger
Yeah,
it.
but that's,
Is
see,
that, did I say
says-
that right,
That says
Andrea?
all new construction,
Yes.
so that really,
That's what
that
we
really goes
talked
clear
about.
across the city.
You're right, that's not
new
phrased, that's not
additions.
phrased accurately.
Right.
No, you're right.
So-
That's what we talked about before we came up with the ordinance, and I like the new additions that require them.
So-
But to put in a sidewalk to nowhere, to me, is ridiculous, and it's ugly.
Paid your
So
dues.
new developments would trigger the sidewalk ordinance. No longer would the placement of an accessory building trigger the ordinance.
Makes sense.
Unless we make changes, and I haven't heard a whole lot of support for it.
Fix it.
But unless we make changes, additions to current buildings would still trigger the sidewalk ordinance. Unless the addition is in a neighborhood where, maybe sidewalks didn't exist, and then they would have the option to pay the fee in lieu of.
And you take like Pheasant Run, they put them in no matter what we say. That's part of their
Right,
house, their
right,
home.
but that's what they want to
HOA,
do, which is
Yeah.
great.
And they look
I think that we
nice.
should encourage that.
But back to your statement, Mayor, about if I had a new home, I had to build a new home and no one else had it, I'd want a sidewalk. Because I don't want people walking on my wife's nice yard. I mean, really, it would look nice. And people have an urge to walk towards the concrete if it's there.
That's your opinion.
I'm gonna give my three.
You got one more, and then David,
Okay.
and then we're going to adjourn.
I think we
No, we're
should.
not, because we all get we all have things to say.
I want all new additions to have a sidewalk, no matter if it's in the middle of nowhere or if it's in an addition. If it's a new construction, house burns down, it has to build a sidewalk. I'm not in favor of any buildings behind the house. If they're building a new building behind the house, they shouldn't have to build a sidewalk.
Yeah, and I think we
No
will
heartburn
make that
there.
change.
And I really don't like this, even adding on the house.
I don't like that.
Because people spend a lot of money and take a lot of time to raise money to add on to their home. They shouldn't have to put another $5,000 on it in front of their house.
Yeah, one bedroom should not constitute a sidewalk.
I agree with
I
everything
agree with
Rodney said. I also have a question about additions like Evansdale.
Excuse me.
Evansdale has got a drainage ditch next to the road, and it runs all the way along the road on all the corners and everything else. And where would you construct a sidewalk in a neighborhood like that?
Well, we've actually had a couple of areas that have drainage ditches, primarily on Garriott.
Well, those are
They're-
commercial areas, yeah.
They are,
I'm
but-
talking about a residential area.
Right, but let's just use the example as a ditch. The sidewalk can come back onto the property closer to the building, and then the property owner just grants it public access easement so that, they can't control, who walks down their sidewalk. Or, in that case, I think that would be an excellent candidate for the fee in lieu of, and so that the city could come through at a later time and properly develop a sidewalk on top of a drainage ditch, which you can do. You can put it in the concrete boxes.
Yeah, you can box it
I
in.
want one more thing, I'll let someone, one thing I would like to do is try to make this ordinance more simple, so every meeting we have twice a month, that we're not arguing over sidewalks. It needs to be more definite.
Were you
I have an
next?
idea for that if I ever get.
Your next.
Dr.
Yeah, he had his hand up a long time ago.
Well, two things. One, where in reading the other city ordinances, the place that I saw the fee in lieu of used the most was kind of what you were alluding to there. It's where it's required, but for geographical, physical reasons, it's just not practical to put a sidewalk there, then they have the out. And that makes sense, and that would fit with what, it gets it away from what you're talking about. And the third thing that I couldn't remember a minute ago is I'd like to see the ordinance include the idea of the downtown district. I think in the downtown district, since we're so focused on that, any kind of new construction basically should trigger the sidewalk so that we have it in that area. So that, I'd like to see that included in the proposal that
And
we
would
come
that,
up with.
so that would that include accessory buildings or additions onto the home?
Pretty hard to do that downtown.
Yeah, I think
It would be,
any
yeah, 'cause
sort
there's
of,
not much room,
any
but-
sort of major construction, there's gonna have to be a little bit of wiggle room in there in the downtown, in that downtown district.
Oh, okay. So you're saying, I misunderstood then. So you're saying that fee in lieu of would not be an option in downtown?
No, I'm on a different topic completely.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I wasn't trying to associate those two. Those
Okay,
were- In
I'm
my
sorry.
mind, those are two different topics. The fee in lieu of is one issue, which I'm not really in favor of, but I can see where it could be utilized for geographically impossible areas to at least make them pay something. But then specifically with regards to downtown, whatever defined district we create, sidewalks ought to be everywhere in the downtown area.
Tammy?
Aaron's next.
No, I think you're next. I'll go
Whichever.
after you. Please go
I
ahead.
don't have that much to say other than, I think that the amendments are pretty, I mean, I like the amendments. I've never agreed with the accessory building thing. I don't remember how that came in there, but I think that's weird. I definitely agree with, I don't think additions should trigger it. And I think the only thing different, and I've kinda lost it now, but, when we talk about agriculturally zoned places, land, I think that it's gonna get sticky when we have variances come up, because some of these houses may not be agriculturally zoned, but they still consider themselves like in the country, but they're still in city limits. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if
I
you've got
know.
a house
And
out on a farm,
yeah,
but it's
we
still in city
talked about
limits,
that.
and it's not agriculturally zoned, I think that's dumb to have a sidewalk there.
Well, maybe that's where I think
A
Dr.
variance
B
would be-
mentioned
That's,
the
that
certain
to me is the kind of
size
stuff that makes
property.
sense when you
Yeah.
have a variance, when you're, 2 acres out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
But that was my only big question. I wanna make sure that we clarify that when we say agricultural land. But other than that, I agree with most of the amendments, I think.
Aaron?
Rodney, I think you're right on with everything too. I don't know if my idea is going to sound great to everybody or just promote a whole lot of comments back of that's a stupid idea. So here's my idea. Similar to the Riser grant program, we had an overlay district. Why could we not create a sidewalk overlay district that spanned throughout the entire city? We could identify the prioritized areas. We could identify the neighborhoods that we don't need sidewalks. And then, of course, the arterial areas would be identified as non-negotiable, and we have to do sidewalks anytime there's construction or improvements. It makes sense to help staff give some more specified direction of you're in a non-negotiable area, I'm sorry, you have to have sidewalks. And I don't know that we can write the ordinance flexible enough to allow that, but I mean, we see all these variances, and we're trying to write an ordinance that is a one-size-fits-all, so to speak. It's impossible to do. Maybe we need to take a different approach to it and just say, okay, here's the overlay and here are the priorities. Any new development, of course, is going to have them. Any considerable project on arterial streets or any project at all on arterial streets is going to have them, and come together unified to a different approach. And again, I'm not saying it's a great idea, but it seems a little bit more systematic to me than trying to do a one-size-fits-all.
I think that's a fun idea.
We've got a lot of regulation going on, which I call over-regulation.
I think that what we have here, I mean, we have an ordinance in place that we've tried, we have found some flaws in. We have a mechanism to address, I think, what many of us see as the major flaws, and then we take another stab at it. And hopefully this will give staff sufficient guidance when people come and say, hey, I don't want to do this, to say, look, you're not going to be able to get away with it. Or when there really is an extreme circumstance, apply for a variance. But I think I like that. I think staff has done a good job of putting together some exemptions and some changes and what we maybe can crib from other cities. And I'd like to see that come back. Andrea's been furiously taking notes, and I hope that you have something useful that we can come back with at a future meting and make a run at.
I do, I think so, yeah. I have the changes that I think that we have a consensus on. And I think that's probably a really good idea too. I think that we can make these changes with a goal of doing that as well, of getting the commission to tell us what are the priority areas. So even though we would have this new tool in place, where can we not use it?
Ben, I like what you said, but I will probably vote yes on every variance. Even if there's one in your area, I'll vote yes for it.
Well, I don't think I can do anything about that, so that's okay.
Pretty sure it'll be 1 against 1.
We'll meet upstairs at 6:30.
Thank you for joining us for the Enid City Commission study session. If you have any questions or comments, visit our website at enid.org.